I met the Forest Warden on a train through the Bavarian forest, on the Regen to Bodenmeis line. It was summer, and outside the forests rushed past, dark green and dense, as though the mountains themselves were breathing and the leaves pulsed with life. The train rattled over bridges, and every time we crossed water, you could feel something different, cold, damp, alive. The air became moist and green. He sat across from me and was one of those men you can see has spent more time outdoors than in. His skin was tanned by the sun, almost mahogany brown, with those deep furrows that only come from decades in the open. His hands dry as bark, with nails darkened by the forest floor, sinews standing out like roots beneath the dirt. In his eyes lay the calm attentiveness of someone who's learned not just to look, but to observe. The kind of patience you need when you must venture out daily in heat and rain, not knowing what you'll find. His whole body had a kind of sleepy wakefulness, as though the forest had given him its own rhythm, ungainly but wise. He told me of his forests, of the lynx tracks in the snow, like an alphabet only he can read. The breadth of the paw, the depth of the claw, the length of the leaps told him a whole life. Of the deer that emerged from the mist in the early morning hours, like ghosts slowly gaining flesh, their eyes large with caution. Of the old trees he called the patriarchs, still standing, though they'd weathered 100 years of wind and snow, their bark like wrinkled old skin, their crowns defiantly raised to the sky. And as he spoke, I understood that a forest warden doesn't simply oversee the land like a guard, but grows into the landscape the way a tree sends out its roots. He worships it in his own quiet way, without words or rituals, only through presence, daily, unwavering presence. He knows each clearing by name, not with words, but with feeling. Knows which in spring becomes too wet, becomes almost a lake, which in August dries hard as stone. He knows each spring, how to tell the difference in their voice, whether they murmur or sing, each streambed with its hidden fish, each secret path used only by the deer, those ways no human soul will ever see. The forests aren't a job for him, not really, but a promise he's made to himself, renewed each year. A promise to be there, to pay attention, to breathe when the forests exhale, to protect not through strength or power, but through presence, through the sheer knowledge that someone's looking, that someone sees, that it matters. I asked him how long he'd been doing it, and he hesitated, as though I'd asked him how long he'd been breathing, or how long the roots of the forest had been in the earth. He smiled quietly, a smile like rain on water, barely visible but profound, and said the question was wrongly phrased. Not how long, but how many times has he done it? How many times has he stepped out, put his leg over the threshold of the hut, even when it rained and the sky was gray like old paint, even when it was cold and his fingers grew brittle in his gloves, even when no other human would ever see what he did, even if the world at home ignored his whole life. Perhaps the trees are writing it down, he said, in their rings, year by year, but they tell no one. The trees are silent. The same round every day, the same check, each corner, every boundary marker, and yet every day different because the seasons shape everything. The weather comes and goes like thoughts. The animals act on their rhythm, not ours. Everything changes, daily. That's the point, he said. Not perfection, not success, not a harvest, but presence. To be there, again and again. Until you yourself become part of the forest, until the boundaries disappear, until you no longer know where the human ends and the forest begins. And I saw that the work of a forest warden isn't only physical, that the legs aren't the only thing working, but the mind too, a kind of constant meditation, a conversation with the invisible. He spoke of the tiredness that sometimes comes after months without rest, when the body grows heavy as lead and the eyes burn from sleep deprivation, but also of the fulfillment of moments no pay could replace when he witnesses something rare, sees an invisible animal, perhaps only a feather that shouldn't be there, watches a birth in the forest. All these moments, glimpses of grace that no other humans see, that he can't share with others because words aren't enough, but that fulfill him deeply, to the bones, to the marrow, to the quietest corners of his heart. He then showed me a photograph on his old mobile phone, a device that looked older than the man himself, with a scratched display on which you could still make out details. A lynx just emerging from a bush, not fast, not aggressive, just watchful, its eyes golden and sharp, like two stones that have caught fire, that shine in the darkness. He said he'd never touched this animal, never granted it physical closeness. Closeness was only photographic. This distance that isn't cold, but respect, sacred distance. But he's observed it over years, seasons, generations. He already knows the children of this lynx and the children of its children, he said. Each one, their personalities different, some bolder, some more cautious. And the observing alone, without touching, without disturbing, without ever truly influencing the animal, that taught him what it means to truly belong, not possessively, but humbly. To belong to a place, not because you live there, not because you have papers in a drawer, but because you're attentive there, loyal, because you look, truly look, because you understand that you're only a guest, a fortunate guest, but a guest who watches, who preserves the forest's trust. We spoke of climate change, of the forests growing thinner year by year, of the birds arriving later, their voices grown weaker, of the mosses no longer damp enough, withering like old paper. But he didn't speak of it with fear, not with despair or resignation, but with the quiet determination of someone who's committed to something, a lifetime, without knowing if it'll be enough in the end, and who does it anyway, every day anew. He's accepted, and that's a form of wisdom, I suppose, that he can't save everything, that there are greater forces, powerful, cosmic forces, stronger than the hand of a man, than a small human voice in the great forest. But he saves something every day, through his mere presence there in the forests, through attention, a damaged clearing that he tends, a fallen tree he brings back into the cycle, a spring he renaturalizes that flows again. That's enough, he said, not full of hope, but full of clarity. It has to be enough. And if it isn't enough, well, then it will be enough for the people who come after me, perhaps their children, their grandchildren, to understand that someone tried, that someone looked, that it wasn't indifferent. The train had long since left the hills behind, and the landscape grew flatter, less dramatic, more civilized, more tamed. The houses came closer, villages, factories, power lines like cobwebs over green ground. The fields became more geometric, more planned, divided into squares, quite different from the wild slopes where nothing human dictates order. But the Forest Warden still gazed outward, not at the landscape passing outside, not at this tamed world, but through it, into the forests of his soul, his body, his memory, I suppose. His gaze was unfocused, not absent, but very present, but far away, 1,000 kilometers away. Perhaps he was thinking of the tracks still to check, of the lynx prints he'd see next week, of the boundaries between protected area and hunting zone that had to be redrawn daily, like an invisible chessboard in the forest. Of the plants that would flower next month, the moonflowers when the nights grew warm enough, when the earth released its reserves. Perhaps he was already home in his mountains. In his body sits another man still, a traveler, but his soul was already there, between the trees, listening. The nearness to the forests was already enough to draw him there, like a magnet, like a promise made to oneself. And then he fell asleep, quite suddenly. His head fell gently against the window with a barely audible click, and his breathing became deep and regular, the way the trees breathe, the way the forest itself breathes. A very faint smile lay on his face, the smile of someone who knows that everything is in its right place, that the forests continue, that the lynx tracks will be visible again tomorrow. It was the smile of someone who feels protected by something great, not by people, not by institutions, not by laws, but by the quiet, never-ending task that drives him out into the forests again each morning, that holds him, that defines him, that secures him. His hands rested on his lap, these hands, these wonderful tools that must feel so much, touch bark, read tracks, set stones. And in his sleep, they were finally relaxed, were no longer working but resting, were only hands, warm, still, ready for tomorrow.
The train carries on, ta-dum, ta-dum.
The wheels follow their own tracks, endless, like the paths of the forest that never end, that only branch, that only deepen with time, with decades, with generations. And I sit here and realize that attention is a form of love, perhaps the purest form. Real love, not the romantic kind you read about in poems or see at the cinema, but the daily, quiet love that remains unadorned, that never gets applause. You don't have to own something to protect it. Don't have to write your name on paper. Don't have to have a certificate. You only have to see it, really see it. With the eyes of this forest warden who looks hour by hour, year by year, who wants to understand what lives there, what breathes there, and then always return to the places where you belong. Not because you work there, not from duty, but because you're needed there. Because the silence there is waiting and hopeful. Because the trees know that someone's coming. The forest breathes, and I breathe with it. Ta-dum, ta-dum. Like a heart that never stops, the warmth of the train around me, the windowsill cool against my shoulder, the gentle darkness outside, impenetrable really, full of life. Everything becomes slow, so slow. The thoughts grow heavy, the eyes sink, and I glide away between waking and dream, where the forest warden still stands between the trees, waiting, lovingly. I'm at the barrel organ player on the Leipzig to Gera line on one of those autumn evenings when the air smells of earth and falling leaves, of decay and beauty all at once. He was a young man, younger than I'd have expected for someone traveling with such an old machine. Perhaps mid-30s, perhaps older, his face was timeless, with a barrel organ that he played during the journey. And in my compartment, he played for me without asking. Not because I'd paid him, I gave him no money, but because he had no one else nearby, no other person to play for. His organ was small, portable, you could strap it on your back, with little wooden figures that danced during the music, bobbed, moved. They were old figures, a couple from the 19th century perhaps, you could tell from the clothes, a child, a man with a hat. And as he turned the crank, slowly, with rhythm, his whole body moving with it, the figures began to wobble, to turn, to move in a slow, mechanical dance that was nonetheless, or because of that, elegant, even dignified. "This is my great-grandmother's organ," he said. "I inherited it from my grandfather, and he'd had it from his mother, 4 generations. And I play it because no one else does anymore, because otherwise it ends up in a museum or rots away." I watched him as he played, and I noticed that he was completely present. No thought of the past, no worry about the future. Only here and now, only the music, only the figures dancing. It was a form of meditation, almost a form of prayer. I asked him how long he's been doing it, how long he's been traveling with his organ, from city to city, from train to train. And he laughed quietly, contentedly. "Since 10 years, he said. "Since my grandfather died." Since he gave me the organ just before he passed, with trembling hands, he said, "You must play it. The music mustn't die. The figures mustn't stand still in eternity like corpses. You must give them life. You must dance with them." The figures were wonderful to look at. An elderly couple holding hands, dressed in clothes from another time. A child with an apple. A man with a hat and walking stick, as though dancing despite his disability. And as the music played, they all moved, coordinated, in harmony, as though telling a story without words. "The beautiful thing about it is that I can't decide how fast they dance," he said. "The music is already programmed in the organ, encoded, in those little pins and cylinders, in those mechanisms that are 100 years old, maybe 150. I can only turn, move the crank. I can't change the music. I can't say, play faster or slower, play something else. I can only make it live, make it breathe, make it sing. And that's like life, I think. You can't really choose what happens, not everything. But you can bring it to life by acting, by turning the crank, by committing yourself and making the best of it, giving everything you have." He told me that he travels with this organ everywhere. Trains, streets, parks, market squares, everywhere there are people, or even where there aren't, empty stations at midnight, he plays. "I also play for ghosts," he said, "for people who are no longer here. Maybe they hear, maybe they dance somewhere to my music." I asked him what the music was, what song he was playing, what melody. And he said, I still hear it exactly, every note. It was an old German folk song, a lullaby. Good evening, good night. A sleep song, slow and sweet, gentle as snowfalls, gentle as sleep. And as he played, his hand turning the crank round and round, steadily, evenly, the organ was no longer just a machine, no longer just wood and metal and wheels and springs. It became a storyteller. It told a story of rest, of safety, of love. And the figures, the little wooden figures, were no longer plastic and wood, no longer lifeless, no longer dead. They were people preparing for sleep, coming to rest, crossing over into dream, closing their eyes, at peace. Everyone who hears this remembers something, the player said as he played, as the crank turned. Some remember their mother singing them this song many years ago. Some remember a place, a children's room, a bed, a window. Some remember the scent of mother, of safety. And for a while they're a child again, small again, safe again, home again. He showed me the mechanics of the organ, the cylinder that codes the music, the pins that trigger the notes. Everything here is craft, he said. Every pin was set by hand. Every cylinder is individually stamped. There are no two organs that are identical. Each one is unique. And mine here, it has a soul. It's lived for decades, brought people to dance, given children dreams. I know that this craft can't be preserved, he said. And it was as though he were grieving something that's dying in this very moment as we speak. Soon there will be no one left who knows how to properly build a barrel organ. There may be 2 or 3 masters left in Europe, in Italy and France, and then it's over. The music falls silent. The craft dies. But until then, I play, everywhere, on this train, on the streets, in the parks, in empty stations. And maybe someone remembers. And maybe that someone tells the story on, tells their children about the man with the barrel organ who sat on the train and played. And so it lives on, a bit longer, doesn't it? So the music stays alive, not in museums, but in people's hearts. At Jarrah, he got out. The station was old, gray, almost crumbling, and I watched him carry the organ gently in his arms as if holding a sleeping child, his most precious child. The organ gleamed faintly under the station lights, and the song stays in me, deep in me, that old melody, good evening, good night, and it will never quite go away. The train carries on, tut-tut, tut-tut, and I think of all the people trying to keep something old alive, against time, against forgetting, against the modern world that wants everything too fast. And now I hear the organ in the rhythm of the wheels, ta-dum, 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 and they become pins and cylinders, mechanical parts, and the wheels dance like the wooden figures, and the train becomes the barrel organ, and I sink away, become the lullaby, become the music, become rest, become sleep. I met the woman who sorts letters on the Hamburg to Lübeck line, past the rough coast, on one of those cold winter evenings when the sea nearby smells of salt and ice and old pain, when the air bites, when the cold cuts through. She was perhaps 70, had snow-white hair, silver hair, hair like snow, and wore spectacles on a silver chain around her neck, like a grandmother from an old story, like someone from another time, from a century that no longer exists. She had an old suitcase with her, a large, heavy suitcase of leather that was worn, that was ancient, full of letters. Real letters, not digital, not electronic, not sent through the internet. Paper, with stamps, with postmarks, with handwritten ink. She sorted them throughout the journey, carefully, with tender fingers, with a kind of ritualistic movement, grouping them by size, by color, by the age of the ink, by scent. Each letter has a scent. I asked her if this was her work, her current job, and she laughed quietly. A laugh without joy, but also without sadness. No, I'm retired. It's been a long time since I worked, a long time. But my whole life was the postal service, my entire life, for 40 years. The compartment right next to here was my office, my workplace. The letters from Hamburg to Lübeck, hundreds of letters every day. I sorted them, marked them, prepared everything for the carriers, the men and women who delivered them. She held up a letter. It was old, very old, completely worn, the corners brown, the ink faded. But these aren't the letters from the job. These are the letters I never received. These are the letters I waited for. These are the letters that never came. My whole life was the post, she said quietly, very quietly, as though speaking to herself. 40 years. Every day I sorted letters, stacked letters, treated letters with respect, as though they contained souls. Because they do, really. They carry souls. A letter isn't just paper, not just ink on paper. A letter is a soul that travels from one person to another, through the post, through trains like this one, through hands like mine. A letter is a prayer that one person sends. And I was the channel, the person who transported those souls, who forwarded those prayers, who carried that love, that pain, those words from one person to another. She showed me the first letter from her suitcase. It was addressed to her in beautiful, trembling handwriting from a name I couldn't quite read, Juan, Carlos. The ink was old, faded, the writing delicate as cobwebs. "This is from my sister," she said, and her voice trembled, quavered, as though the past were returning in that moment. "We had a falling out in 1963, a dreadful quarrel, a fight over love, over family, over life, over the choices we made. And she moved to Buenos Aires, far away, to the other side of the world, away from me, away from us. And I thought, surely she'll write to me once she's calmed down, once time heals. I waited. Every day I went to the letterbox, hoping, expecting. But she didn't write. No words, no sign, silence. And then, 7 years later, 7 long years, it was 1970, this letter came. Not from her, from her widower. He wrote to me, he told me, that she'd died in Buenos Aires, that she'd married another man, that she'd had children, that she'd lived all her life in the belief that I wouldn't speak to her, that I was too proud to apologize, that I hadn't forgiven her. But I wasn't proud. I was only sad. I was lost. I waited for a letter, for a word, for a small gesture, for a sentence that never came.
She showed me more letters, each one, each with a story.
A letter from a publisher saying her poetry collection had been rejected, a collection she'd worked on for decades. A letter from her mother, written at the end of her life but never sent. A letter addressed to herself in a child's handwriting. She took another letter, old too, worn, creased, the corners brown, almost rust-colored from rust, from time, from tears perhaps. "And this is from a man I wanted to dance with," she said, and her eyes were very far away now. "I saw him every Friday at Hamburg Station, every Friday at the same time. We sat in the same little cafe, at the same table by the window, but I never told him. I never told him what I felt, what my heart sang when I saw him. I was too shy, too unsure. And then he died. I saw it in the newspaper, right at the top. Herr Hansen, 62, deceased. And the world suddenly turned dark, turned cold. And I thought, I'll write a letter about what he would have meant to me if I'd been brave enough to say it. A letter with the words I should have said if I hadn't been so foolish, so cowardly. A letter he'd never read because he was already gone, because he was dead. And I kept it in my flat, beside my bed, so I'd feel him while I slept, so his presence would hold me.
"And do you know what's strange?"
she said, and now her eyes shone, even though she was old, even though grief lived in them. "I've spent my whole life transporting letters, sorting them, forwarding them, connecting people. I connected the people, all these people who loved each other, who missed each other, who yearned, who wanted to share things. Thousands of letters, hundreds of thousands perhaps. And yet I myself was isolated. I was alone. I was lost. Because I didn't know how to write what I really felt, how to bring the truth onto paper. Because I lacked the courage, the patience, the hope. I waited for letters instead of writing them myself. I waited for words from others instead of giving my own words, finding my own voice." She packed all the letters carefully back in her suitcase, one by one, each like a sacred object, like treasure, like a heart. Now, in retirement, I've begun to write down all the letters I should have written, all the words I didn't say. Not for the post, not for other people, not to send them. For myself. So I know that I said them, that I lived, that I felt, even if no one receives them, even if no one reads them. She opened another letter from her suitcase. This one was quite new, the ink still fresh, barely dry. "And this I've just written," she said with a smile. "This week, for my friend Elena. We've known each other for 15 years, and I've never said what she means to me, never. And now I'm writing it down. In this letter that I won't send, but that I'll keep, that I'll treasure, that lives next to my heart, like treasure, like sacred treasure." It's never too late, I think. It's really, truly, never too late. She said quietly, almost whispering, as though sharing a secret, as though speaking a sacred prayer. A letter is a way to send your soul to someone, your deepest feelings, your truth, your love, your pain. And if the letter doesn't arrive, if the person is already dead or too far away or simply not ready to hear the truth, not ready to receive, the letter still hasn't been lost, still isn't wasted, still isn't in vain. The letter lives in me, I've written it, I've said it, and the words exist now, forever, whether the other person reads them or not, whether they lie in a suitcase or in my heart. I've said my truth. That's enough. That's everything. It's really everything that matters.
At Lübeck, she got out, slowly, carefully, and she took her suitcase full of unsent letters, the heavy old suitcase that carries her whole life. And I stay in my compartment and think of all the words I've never said, all the letters I've never written, all the words that died in my throat, all the feelings I never voiced. And the train carries on through the night, through the Baltic night, and it's cold outside, very cold and salty. And the harbor of Lübeck shines in the distance, far away, like another world, and I reach out my hand as though grasping a letter that reaches me, that finds me. And I open it slowly, carefully, and the words are warm and sweet, and they say, "You are seen. You are loved. You are not alone. Sleep now. Rest. Let go." And I sink away into the warmth of these unwritten but felt words, into the night, into the silence, where all letters arrive, where all words arrive, in the end. I met the Lamplighter on a night train from Prague to Nuremberg. It was winter, and Prague looked that evening like a snow globe someone had just shaken. White flakes over the Charles Bridge, over the towers, over the rooftops of the old town, which stand so close together they look like the teeth of a giant crown. I'd wandered through the city all day, through narrow lanes, over cobblestones, past facades painted so beautifully you could stand and forget everything. The cold, the time, yourself. She was a small, delicate woman with silver white hair emerging from beneath a wool cap and a face as fine and as old as the houses of Prague's old town. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and when she smiled, they glowed like the gas lamps she would tell me about. She wore a long, dark coat that seemed to belong to another era, and around her neck a scarf that smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. We sat opposite each other, and for a while we both looked silently out the window as Prague's lights slowly receded and vanished. Then she sighed and said, "I'll miss those lights." And I asked where she was going, and she said, "To my daughter in Germany for the winter. But my heart stays in Prague with the lamps." She had been a lamplighter. Not in this time, of course, she laughed, a quiet, warm laugh. In another time, when Prague still had gas lamps on the lesser town side and in the old town, 42 of them, and someone had to light them every evening. That was me, she said. Every evening, at dusk, I'd set out with my ladder and my long pole with the flaming taper at the end. From lamp to lamp, through the lanes, across the bridge, up the hill to the castle. 42 lamps, 42 small flames. 42 times that soft hiss when the gas ignites and the light blooms. Like a flower opening. The same every evening. For 30 years. I asked if it wasn't tedious. 30 years, the same route every evening, the same lamps. And she shook her head, slowly, firmly, and said, "Tedious? No, never. Because no two evenings were alike. The light is different every evening, you see. In summer, it's golden and warm and falls at an angle through the lanes. In autumn, it's copper-colored and soft and lies on the wet stones like molten metal. In winter, when snow lies thick, it's silvery and clear, and each lamp becomes a little star on earth. And in spring, when the cherry trees on the lesser town side bloom, then the lamplight mixes with the white blossoms, and everything looks like a dream. She told me about the people she'd meet on her rounds. The old gentleman who stood every evening at the third lamp on Mostek and smoked, always at the same time, always in the same spot. The cat that followed her from the 7th to the 12th lamp, black and silent as a shadow. The young couple who always kissed beneath the lamp at the bridge and didn't notice her passing. The street musician who played guitar in summer beneath the big lamp in the square and whose melodies seemed to blend with the light, as though the notes were made of light and the light was made of sound. I asked her what it means to light a lamp, and she looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "Every light counts." That's what I learned. Every single one. 42 lamps aren't many, not in a city as large and old and full of lights as Prague. But when you stand in a dark lane and you light the lamp, and suddenly there's light, warm, soft, golden light, and the shadows retreat and the lane becomes friendly and welcoming, then you know it counts. That this one small light has changed something. Not much, but enough. Enough for the person walking through that lane and who suddenly feels less alone. Enough for the child looking out a window and seeing the lamp and thinking, "The night isn't as dark as I thought." "You don't need to illuminate the whole night," she said quietly. "You only need to light one lamp, one, and then the next, and then the next. So a path of light comes into being, not all at once, but step by step, lamp by lamp. That's all you can do, and it's enough." The train passed through the Bohemian landscape, dark and still, and I could see here and there a light in a window, a farmhouse, a village, a single lamp on a farm. And each of those lights suddenly seemed important to me, every single one, as though someone had lit it precisely for this moment, precisely for this view from the train window. She fell asleep at some point, the lamplighter, her head leaning against the window, her hands folded in her lap. And I lay awake for a long time thinking of her words. Every light counts. You don't need to illuminate the whole night, just one light, then the next, then the next. The train carries on, and the lights outside grow fewer, and my compartment is warm and still. Just the rattle, ta-dum, ta-dum, and the small reading lamp above my bed, casting its warm, golden light on the pillows and blanket. One small light, my light for this night, and it's enough, more than enough. I close my eyes, and I see Prague in the snow, the lamps blooming one after another, like flowers made of light. And I let myself be carried by the warmth, by the silence, by the soft, golden glow. I met the innkeeper on the Munich-Freising line in autumn, when the leaves had already turned brown and grey like old photographs, rain rattling against the windows like drums, rhythmic, soothing, music that draws you to sleep. She sat across from me in the compartment, and it was as though she'd sat down to tell me something that had weighed on her heart for a long time, something that took years to find words for,
She was small, solid, powerful, with hands that constantly wanted to do something that couldn't sit still, adjusting a cup that was already in its place, folding a cloth that was already neat, plucking at a thread only she could see, the restlessness of work. Her hair had turned gray, a silver gray you can only imagine if you've spent a long time in kitchen steam, in the warmth of ovens, near boiling pots, as though the heat had silvered her. But her eyes had remained young, awake and curious as a child's, as though observing the whole world, searching for details others would overlook. A posture, the way someone holds their spoon, whether with trembling or strength. A small furrow between the eyes that reveals sorrow or worry, or both together. She told me of her inn, an old house from the 18th century on a quiet street, not on a main road, but off to one side, where guests came to forget, not their names, not their worries entirely, never entirely, but at least for a few hours, the volume of the world, the noise, the hurry that rings outside. Not to celebrate, not to run wild, that happened elsewhere in the loud beer gardens where the music's too loud and the voices shout. Here they came to eat, to speak quietly if they wanted to speak at all, to switch off the world for a few hours, or at least the hurry, the impatience, the time that can't stand still. She cooks herself, she said, not because a chef is expensive, but on principle, with ingredients from the market that she chooses personally, that she's touched, held in her hand. And she can't do otherwise, can't simply open tins or reheat frozen food. A chicken that she knows, that she's visited before it came to her table, an animal that ran in the yard of a farmer who calls the animal by its name. That's Kunigunda, or that's Old Sepp. And the innkeeper knew these names, knew which chicken was which. Cheese from the woman 2 valleys over, a woman about her age who makes milk into cheese, from cows whose names the innkeeper also knew, whom she sometimes greeted when passing by. Mushrooms she gathers herself when autumn comes with a special knife her father gave her, a knife as old as her memory, its handle smooth from use, from trust. I asked her where she found the strength to do all this, day after day, year after year, without a holiday, without a break, always setting the same tables with white cloths, always cooking the same dishes from recipes her grandmother gave her, knowing the guests wouldn't remember, would leave and forget her. She thought for a long time before answering, a very long time. And I saw that she was thinking honestly, not simply reciting a prepared answer, but digging deeper. She said she'd never asked about strength, never posed the question to herself. Strength doesn't come from wanting, she said, not from discipline, not from guilt. Strength comes when you love something, when doing it is love. When you see a guest arriving, tense, wound up, restless, with shoulders drawn up to his ears, fists in his pockets, and then, after 2 hours at the table, in the warmth, with the food, you see him breathe, truly breathe, really breathe, from deep down, from where life lives. You see his shoulders sink slowly, as though you'd lifted a great weight from him, as though you'd made him lighter. You see him drink his glass of wine more slowly, because he no longer has reason to hurry, because time here makes no enemies, because time is gentle here. That's enough. That's the strength. That's more than strength. That's a reason to live. She told me of a man who came every week, always alone, always on Wednesday, like a ritual that kept him alive, that structured his week, that kept him awake. For 10 years. 10 years, she said, every week, same day, same time, same table, near the window. That was, she said, longer than some people are married to their wives. 650 times that this man came. He never said much, wasn't talkative, ate the same dish, pork roast with dumplings, and he always ate it completely, down to the last bite, to a clean plate, as though he were eating for the first time each time, with enjoyment, with reverence. But one day he didn't come, and the table remained empty, and the innkeeper knew something was wrong, not from a phone call, not from a message, but from the feeling that came over the inn when a regular chair sits empty, when a hole opens in the usual order. She asked around, questioned other guests, old men who'd been coming longer, until she found out that his son had fallen ill, very seriously, very threateningly, and the man was with him at the hospital, keeping watch, waiting. She sent him homemade broth, a large pot full of chicken and vegetables and thyme, through a neighbor, a friend of the man. He came back later, weeks later, after many Wednesdays without him, and his eyes were red, swollen from tears and sleeplessness. And the only thing he said, sitting at the same table in the same voice, was, "The broth gave me strength." Not the food, the broth, he said, the way it was made, with love, with care, with the knowledge that someone was thinking of me. Since then, he came on Fridays, too, additionally, to say thank you, to show that he'd understood, that the innkeeper was a healer, not with medicine, but with broth and attention. "That's the job," she explained to me as the train drove through the night and the windows were black like mirrors, impenetrable, reflective. Not the cooking, not being the perfect cook. Others are just as good at that, or better, young people with cooking schools and modern knowledge. The remembering, the small attention that no one sees but everyone feels, deep in the bones. That this guest drinks his coffee without sugar, always, without exception, because his wife is too sweet and the coffee must be bitter, for balance, for equilibrium in the marriage. That other one takes it with a dash of rum, not because it tastes good, but because he carries cold within himself, grief, loss, and the rum warms him, soothes, comforts him. That the old lady always asks for a window seat, not by chance, but because she sees the birds outside, and the birds remind her of her late husband, who was a bird watcher, who taught her the names of all the birds. That the businessman who looks like stress in person, tense, hurried, in truth only needs someone to ask him how he really is, not politely, but genuinely, not a formula, but genuine curiosity. And then, when he answers, quietly or loudly, to listen, truly listen, not just wait impatiently until you can speak again, but be present, here, with him. The train raced through the dusk, faster now. The wheels clacked louder, and the innkeeper gazed out at the flying lights, houses, windows, other people in their warm rooms, other realities, other lives. I saw how her hands suddenly stilled, as though she'd noticed they weren't working, that she was sitting relaxed at the table, that there was, for a moment, no inn, no stove, no guest waiting. That was rare for this woman, this rest, this silence. Perhaps she was thinking of a table waiting for her, set but unoccupied, empty like a promise. Of a stove that must be heated, that must stay warm because the night grows cold, the windows fog, the guests arrive cold. Of a meal that wants cooking, already fragrant, steaming, not because she herself is hungry. Innkeepers eat little, in passing, not properly, but because someone will come and silently need her to cook for them, to show, through the food, through the taste, through the steam, that she sees them, that they matter, that they're not nobody. She left the train at Freising with a small bag, not heavy, not full, because she took little, needed little from outside. The innkeeper needed nothing from outside. Her whole life was in her inn, in her tables, her plates. And I watched her walk down the platform with the calm of someone who knows what the work is for, what it means. Not for fame. No one would read her name in a newspaper. No critic would admire her. No paper would report on her. Not for money. Inns aren't profitable, not in the modern sense, not wealth-making. But because there are still tables waiting, countless tables, tables that are empty now because the guests haven't arrived yet, haven't knocked. But soon they will. Soon someone will sit there. And guests, people who haven't yet found enough silence in this loud world, in this hurried world, come to her, perhaps without knowing it, to find exactly that. Silence, attention, being seen. And a dish made for them, not for anyone, not generically, but specially, personally, for them alone, for their hunger, their pain, their loneliness.
And the train carries on. Da-dum, da-dum. And I think of inns, of small lights in distant houses where someone cooks while rain falls outside, merciless, cold. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And somewhere a guest sits, alone, lonely, beaten down by the world, and breathes slowly, slowly, for the first time today, and becomes human again, valuable again, seen again. And that's enough. That's everything. The rattle of the wheels has a special rhythm tonight. Ta-dum, ta-dum. A rhythm that's like music, like an amplified heartbeat. And it reminds me of an evening many years ago on the Nuremberg to Ansbach line. A line I don't normally travel, but that evening I did. I met a woman who told me, not asking, but informing me, that she was once a tightrope walker. Not tried or wanted, no, she was it, actually, truly, with her whole body. For 40 years, night after night, under lights, before thousands, on a single rope, over the void. She was traveling in spring when the train went slower than usual, carefully, over bridges, over water, and she sat very still in her seat, her hands quiet in her lap, not nervous, not restless, not trembling, but her eyes followed the flicker of telegraph poles outside, flying past like the tick of a metronome, like a beat, a pulse, as though the eyes had their own memory, a memory of ropes, music that only she could hear, only her, and no one else in the world. She told me what it was like to enter the rope each night, under circus tents in strange cities, the rope taut, waiting. The great lights on her face, so hot that she could sweat, that the sweat came into her eyes, that she was almost blinded by light and heat and fear just from standing under it. The tent full of people, hundreds, thousands, a crowd of humans, all holding their breath at the same time, like one great animal, one heart that stood still. Not because of the risk. Many didn't understand that. The audience thought it was about fear, about danger, about the possibility that she would fall. But it was different, entirely different. It was because something impossible was happening before their eyes, something that shouldn't be, that a woman could enter the air, that the laws of nature would go silent for a moment. She walked over nothing, over 20 meters of air, warm air, dry, in a silk costume, silvery, glittering, with bare feet on the rope, and nothing held her, absolutely nothing, no net so large it could catch her, except what she herself was, her body, its knowledge. Balance, courage, a trust in one's own body that can't be explained, that must be experienced, not understood. And a kind of inner singing. Yes, that was it exactly, she said. Her voice grew quiet. A music that exists only on the rope, a music that comes from within, from the soul. She showed me her hands, slowly, almost hesitantly, as if they surprised even her. That these hands were there, that they were still hands. They were beautiful, although, or perhaps because, they showed that they'd lived, hard, worn. Calluses on the fingers, thickened, brown, dark brown, from the rope, from gripping, from holding, from decades of digging, of clinging. An old scar on the palm, a fall, she said, 1987, in Munich, a December evening, cold, when the rope was somehow too thin, too old, or her heart too heavy, weighed down, sad. But she fell only about 2 meters onto the safety nets, as it should be, as planned precisely, tested 100 times over. The scar reminded her every day, she said, of the moment of humility, that the net was there, that someone had stretched it before she went up, the maestro, the safety master, the older man, the circus man, the man who believed in her trust, who trusted her courage. That trust is the basic form of all daring. That you can't fly without a net, without someone who ensures your safety. Without the net, maybe she wouldn't have dared to climb up, or she would have climbed and played with fear, would have performed fear on the rope, and that would have been all, a show without soul. She was now in her 7th decade, the skin at her neck loose, her hands trembling when she sat very still, when attention waned. But when she talked, when she spoke of that time, I still saw the young woman in her, not in her body, not in her movements, but in the way her voice flew, the way she glowed when she spoke of the music that came from below to above, the music of the circus, the drums that gave her the beat, the pulse, the timing, the life. The orchestra played for the circus audience, for the spectators, hundreds, but the music was for the rope, for the body on the line, for her alone, a duet between music and body. The maestro stood beneath the rope and never looked up, not once, never raised his eyes, because he knew she made it, that she was on the rope, safe. His trust was unshakable, a kind of belief, religious, calm. Only once a year eye contact, at the end of the season, when they left the stage, when the last net was packed away, when the tent was dismantled. And then, only then, after months of silence, they looked at each other, and the eyes said what a whole year of music couldn't say, what no rope could say. She said she was never badly injured, never seriously, not so that she lay in hospital, except that one night in 1987, and even that wasn't serious. The body learns what you ask of it, and it's a kind of miracle, she said, a miracle you don't understand, only experience. The rope speaks to you when you learn to listen, not with words, not with voices, but with the feeling under your feet, the way the line vibrates, how it lives, how it gives you instructions. It tells you when you can go faster, when the tension is right, steady, holding, when you can glide, when you must slow down, when a wind comes, when the air changes, when your body grows tired and you feel it before your mind knows it. It's like dancing with something alive, not with a dead partner, not with choreography, but with a rope that breathes, that listens to you, that adapts to you. And at some point, after 40 years, countless times, thousands of nights, the rope becomes part of you, not metaphorically, but literally, physically. You carry it in your nerves, in your bones, in your marrow, in your depths, even when you no longer climb it, even when your feet touch the ground, even when the rope is long since rolled up and rotten, you still carry it.
And why do I stop? I asked her. That was the question I most wanted to know, that interested me most. She stared out the window for a long time, a very long time, and her eyes became very bright, not sad, not wistful, not nostalgic, but glowing, as though in that very moment she saw that tightrope walker she'd been from the outside with the audience's eyes, as if seeing her own life like a film, as if watching another person. She said, and her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, but with depth, "Because it's time for others. Because the young woman who comes after me, the woman with fast legs and brave eyes, also must learn to walk over the void, over her fear, over the rope that tells her where it won't hold. Must replace me, not copy, never copy, that's the greatest mistake. A tightrope walker doesn't copy, she reinvents herself, reinvents the rope, reinvents the music. Replace, that's it. That's the gift of one generation to the next. Space, room, opportunity, the chance to find your own rope." The train arrived at Ansbach, the platform visible now, the lights close, the waiting house, the first announcement of the end of this journey. She stood up, without hurry, slowly, very gently. Her movements were still controlled, still elegant, still balanced, as though the tightrope walker was still balancing herself on the train of life, still walking a rope, safe. She said only one more thing to me, only one, and I hear these sentences still today when I lie awake in the evening, when the night is dark. The best thing about getting old is that you know what you were afraid of, and you see that fear was never the thing, never the reality. Fear was only the sensory organ of life, the warning, the signal. The thing was always the rope, that one point, that one line that holds you, carries you, defines you. The rope and the air below it, endless, boundless, and the trust that the net is there, that someone stretched it, that you're not alone. That stays. That stays your whole life, that you never drop, your whole life.
She went out onto the dark platform. Cold air from outside streamed in, and I watched her walk very upright, very balanced, as though the rope had corrected her spine forever, had taught her the back, taught her the posture, what it means to stand upright against gravity, against time. And I lean back in my seat. The headrest is warm from the body, and the rattle comes back. Ta-dum, ta-dum. The train starts moving again, and I imagine that all people carry a kind of rope, invisible, hidden, something from their past, something great that held them balanced when it mattered, when everything hung on the rope. A trust, a love, a task, a mission that saved us, that held us. And now on the train, in the night, in the dark night, I'm also very balanced, slowly, quietly, safely, as though I'm walking on my own rope, invisible, and the net beneath me is gentle and wide, and someone has stretched it. The memory comes when I hear the water, and tonight I hear it, from somewhere, from outside, from rain on the roof or from within, from my memories, my bones. I can't say. The distinction is difficult for me. And it brings me back to a night long ago, decades ago, on the Wismar to Bad Doberan line, a route by the Baltic Sea, when I was young and didn't yet know that some moments stay with you forever, that they don't fade, that they visit you decades later in trains, simply because they were so still, so complete, so true, that they became immortal. It was a night like many other nights, but it was also the only night that counted, that really mattered for my whole life. I've got out at Wismar for reasons I've long since forgotten. Perhaps I was in love, with a face I no longer see. Perhaps I was sad in a way I couldn't explain. Perhaps I simply needed a night without platforms, without windows, without wheels, without motion. And I went to the harbor because I couldn't sleep, because the night was too alive and the city was foreign to me, a strange Hanseatic city, brick and water. And I needed something familiar, the water, the sea that's the same everywhere. It was June, still warm, early summer, and the moon stood so bright that the Baltic looked silver, not blue as in daylight, not gray as in the morning, but silver, metallic, as though light itself had become liquid, as though the sky had poured itself into the water, and the water's surface trembled like silk, like living skin, as though the earth were breathing. And there lay an old boat, small, not bigger than 2 meters, painted green, but worn by time so patiently, so gently washed by sun and rain and decades, that you could see the layers of years, green, red, white, green again, green a third time, like the rings in a tree trunk, and each color was an epic, a generation of fishermen, a life, an attempt to tame the Baltic. A man sat in it, in the boat, very still, very old, about 70, 80, it was hard to say. The age was in his hands, not in his face. With hands as discolored as the boat's wood, from salt and sun and work, from decades, from 1,000 fish, from 1,000 nets. He had a pipe, but not in his mouth. It lay beside him on a kind of wooden board, not smoking just now, but simply present, as though a pipe itself is already a form of speech, a kind of silent statement, a symbol of age, of waiting. I stood on the quay, the Baltic below, dark, deep,
And I didn't speak to him. That would have disturbed everything, ruined it all. Instead, I sat down very slowly on a wet stone, cold, cool, wet from spray, and we sat together, this old man in his boat, which was old too, me on my stone on the quay, and watched how the moon drew its traces across the water, long, silver paths of light that led nowhere but everywhere, to every harbor, to every heart that lay awake, that listened.
After a long time, he said, "The boat goes for repair tomorrow, perhaps for the last time." He didn't say it sadly, not bitterly, not wearily, only matter-of-factly, calmly, as though saying that it will rain tomorrow, or that the tide comes, or that the sun sinks. Simply a fact, a truth, that's accepted, that you can't change. I asked him how long he'd had the boat, how many years, how many decades. He said it's not important to know the number, the exact number. What matters is that someone still cares for it, that it doesn't simply rot in a corner, that it isn't forgotten, that someone still thinks of the boat. The world throws away, he said, the great modern world, where everything is plastic, everything is fast, everything is for one season, 1 year, then rubbish. But I try to tend, to preserve, to rescue. That's my small resistance against forgetting, against great indifference. That's my job in my old age. Not to make anymore, not to create, but to hold fast, to keep safe. And he didn't even touch the pipe, didn't lift it from the board, but I felt that he wanted to speak, that something in him had been waiting for many years for someone to listen, to sit quiet, to understand that words by water are different. So I listen. He told me of fishing trips with his son 40 years ago, a whole lifetime. Nights when the nets were full, so full that the boat nearly sank and the fish shone silver in the moonlight, warm, still alive, thrashing. Of nights when the stars were so numerous that you could never again be afraid of the dark, because the dark was here, everywhere, all-encompassing, and it wasn't dark, but full of light, of millions of lights, of hope. Of storms when the boat danced like a living body, wild movements, chaotic, every time he thought, now it goes under, now it all ends. But it always came back, rose again, wave after wave, strong, reliable. Of the only woman who ever sat on this boat with him, not his wife, he said, just a woman, whom he didn't want to speak of anymore, couldn't, too long ago. But how the night had smelled, of salt and tar and a perfume that time long ago dissolved, but that he still smells in dreams. And then he told me, or told the night, the Baltic, the moon. It wasn't clear to me to whom exactly, but it didn't matter. Of nights when this boat turned like a feather in a tanner's hand, turned, rose, sank, and he held the lines, the ropes, tight, these ropes that were power, that meant everything, and trusted his strength, his experience, and the grace of the sea, the favor of nature. Of fish so heavy that they stretched entire nets, so that the boat nearly went under, sank, disappeared, but never went under, never completely, never forever, God protect it. Of storms that passed like animals, wild animals, black animals, and then suddenly there was silence again, peace again, moonlight again. And of the moment, sometime, after years and years, when he understood that he wasn't dependent on this boat, that his life didn't hang on it, but that the boat was dependent on him, that the boat needed him, that his hands needed it, his knowledge, his love. I asked him, "And now? Now, as you grow older, as the body can no longer?" And he smiled, for the first time that whole night, a soft smile, not bitter, not desperate, but soft as water, that changed his whole face, made it younger somehow. He said, "Now I sit here and remember. That's also life, real life, you see. Some days are for doing,
for fishing, for working, for going on, for creating. Some days are for remembering, and those are just as important, perhaps more so. Memory is sometimes even more precious than the doing itself, because it's not eternal. It disappears too sometime when you die, when the memory has no one left to carry it. And that makes it valuable, makes it precious. That's why I sit here on the quay in the moonlight and let the night paint them, my memories, into the water, into the moonlight. Share them with you, share them with the Baltic, so they're not completely lost.
The moon began to sink, slowly, as though time itself grows tired, as though the night begins to sleep. And I saw that this old man began to sleep very gently, his head nodded backwards against the boat, against the wooden wall, his hands in his lap, still beside the pipe that still hadn't been smoked, that waited. I left him there, not because I was cruel, not because I didn't want to stay. I could have stayed, would have been welcome, he wouldn't have noticed. But because I understood that I'd become part of his memory, a new visitor sitting on the quay, and his boat now needed only him and the moon, needed the silence. The harbor would hold him, safe, lovingly. The Baltic, that's cold but not unkind, and the old green boat that would go for repair tomorrow. But he didn't care about that, about this repair, this necessary maintenance. It was already immortal, in spirit, in his memory, in the scent of salt that came from the pipe, that still waited, patiently. And I'm back on the train tonight. And I still hear the water. I hear it in the wheels. Or no, it's the rattle of the wheels. But that's also water, also a river, also something that flows and carries me, moves me, slowly, safely, like a boat drifting on the Baltic, drifting out into the unknown. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And I sit very still, as in an old boat, and time no longer matters. Time's not important here, has become unimportant. Everything is memory, and at the same time everything is present, alive. That stone on the quay is here, in my seat. That old man sits beside me, waiting, waiting. And I breathe, slowly, regularly, like the waves. And the moonlight comes through the window, silver, warm, golden now. And the pipe still smells, still, of salt. And I glide away into a harbor without land, into a boat that arrives nowhere, only travels. I met the old cyclist on the Bruges to Ghent line on an autumn evening, when the fields were already dark, had lost their green color, were only black against the sky, and only telegraph poles flew past, black lines against the dark sky, like musical notes, endless, repeating. He was one of those men you can still see strength in, long strength, even though time has done its best, given him white hair like snow, wrinkles around the eyes like maps, like lines of a long journey. His legs were the legs of a cyclist, characteristic, unmistakable. Not thick, not muscular in the modern sense, not like a bodybuilder, but hard, well-trained, sinewy, lean, as though they'd stored 1,000 kilometers in every fiber, the distance imprinted. 1,000 cold mornings, 1,000 hills climbed, conquered, patiently conquered. He told me that he'd spent his whole life on a bike, that the bike was his life. Not metaphorically, but literally. Not professionally, not as a racer, not on the road in the Tour of Belgium. There were no cups, no medals, no fame. He'd been a librarian in Bruges, very quiet work, among books, among silence, among books that don't move, don't travel. But in the morning, before the library opened, an hour before, at 5 o'clock, he rode.
and in the evening, when it closed at 6, at 8, immediately away on the bike, no transition, immediate motion. For 50 years, every day, practically every day, only when it was snow-covered and the bike couldn't grip, only when the body hurt too much, was injured. But that was rare, very rare, almost never. Not from ambition, not to get better, not to break records, but because his body needed it, the way other people need to breathe, the way you must eat, the way you drink water, the way you need to sleep. I asked him if he ever participated in competitions in his youth, if the ambition was stronger back then. He shook his head slowly and smiled quietly, inwardly. He said that racing would kill cycling, that it destroys something that's sacred. You don't ride to beat someone else, not to win, not for a cup sitting in a cabinet, not for fame that fades. You ride to feel the wind on your skin, to know freedom, to cross the mountains, not to conquer them, to dominate them, but to honor them, to respect them, to learn their patience. Not to test your body's limits, not to ride wild, not to prove yourself, but to respect them, to understand where the limits are and accept them with gentleness. Respect, not victory. Patience, not speed. Gentleness rather than strength. That was his way alone, and it was a way that had fulfilled him for 50 years, that kept him alive, that made him happy. He described to me a route he'd ridden again and again for 5 decades, from Bruges over the flat fields where nothing breaks the wind, where you can feel the wind pure, unhindered, along the canals where the water is black and green and mirrors the sky exactly, over little wooden bridges he knows all by name, the bridge with green railings, the bridge where the wood splinters and ages, the bridge where a dog always barks, through villages whose names are as familiar to him as his own hand, as his own heartbeat. Tielt, Ringine, Erp, names like friends. He knows every tree on this route, he said. The old oaks, gnarled, wise, that stand at kilometer 19, have stood for generations. The linden at kilometer 32, symmetrical, beautiful. He knows where the winds blow hardest, between Feldberg and Klembergen, where the air grows cold, blustery, where the best light is in the afternoon, the golden hour. The golden hours at a certain bend, where the sun sits low, where an old woman sits and sometimes offers cider when you pass, even though she's no longer young as she once was, even though her hands tremble, even though time has changed her. But now, he said, and his voice wasn't sad but factual, but with a kind of depth, the bike won't do it anymore. Not physically. Not because he didn't want to, not because his heart wasn't ready, but because the body says the time comes when you do other things, learn other rhythms. That's not a loss, he said. That's a transformation, a metamorphosis, a new chapter in a long book. Perhaps you sit on a different bike, in thought, and ride the old ways again every day, in memory, perfectly, painlessly. Or perhaps you simply sit and watch how others ride, how the young ride, with innocence. Perhaps that's the true school of age, learning that the body isn't the only thing that can ride, that can move. The mind can ride too, fast, endlessly. The soul can ride, and that journey doesn't stop, not ever, not really. He also showed me a small graph on his phone, an old phone with a large display. He'd recorded every day of the last 10 years carefully, obsessively almost. Kilometers, time, average speed, all noted. A visual proof of the life he'd lived, decades compressed into a screen. The mountains hadn't gotten bigger. On the contrary, they grew flatter, the distances shrank, the years took their toll. But that wasn't important, he said, not really. What counted was the continuity, the regularity, that each line was connected to the next, year after year, day after day, like a red thread that was never broken, that couldn't be, that he protected. His son was with him on the train. A large, quiet man of about 50, no longer young himself, with the same long legs as his father inherited, the same upright posture, the spine straight, learned from decades on the bike. He looked at his father while he spoke, very attentively, with a kind of love that wasn't sentimental, not dramatic, but light, uncomplicated, familiar, natural as breath. And I saw that the son also knew that his father wouldn't be able to ride much longer, that the time comes, inevitable, that the body grows weaker. The knees weren't good anymore. The father didn't say it, but you could see it. You could feel it. The pain was invisible, but present. And that was okay. Everything was okay. That was accepted. That was part of the rhythm, this great music that life plays, this ta-dum, ta-dum, that slows with the years but doesn't end, that just changes its speed. I asked the old cyclist, "What will you miss most?" And the question hung in the air between us, an important question. He thought for a long time, a very long time, many minutes, and I saw that he was thinking honestly, not simply answering, but looking deep into himself. He said, "The rhythm. The pedal stroke is the only thing that ever seemed perfect to me in my whole life for 60 years. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. It's not fast, not slow, not hard, not soft, not aggressive. It's just right. It's like a metronome that beats my life, that measures my time. And when that's over, when the pedals are still, when the legs can't anymore, I must find a new rhythm, a new beat. Perhaps breath, regular even, calm. Perhaps the heartbeat, ta-dum, ta-dum. The same as always, reliable, faithful. Perhaps only being able to sit still and remember, ride the route in thought again and again, every turn, every tree, perfectly, without pain, without tiredness, immortally." At Ghent, they got out, father and son, hand in hand, not simply for support, but with intention, with tenderness, consciously, like two people who understood each other without ever needing to say much, who didn't need to speak to love each other. The love was self-evident. And I watched them walk on the platform, slowly, not in a hurry, step by step, safely. And the father didn't look back at the train, not nostalgically, not sadly, not wistfully, but as though he'd simply understood that one journey was over, that this ride, this story, now ended, that a new one, different, with new pedals, a new rhythm, a new life, was beginning. And the train carries on, ta-dum, ta-dum, like a wheel turning and turning, endless, not tiring. And I sit here in my seat, and the rhythm grows slower, the wheels slower, and the eyes grow heavier, the thoughts fade. And somewhere, old cyclists still ride their ways, not with legs, not with strength, but with the heart, with memory, perfectly, painlessly. And that's good. That's enough. I met the dry stone builder on the Porrentray to Delimon line on a spring evening when the air was still cool, but with a kind of promise of warmth, as though the earth were slowly waking, as though hope were coming. She was a woman of about 65, with broad shoulders and a back that was straight, not from the gym, not from posture, but from years, decades, in which you stand upright before stones, in which gravity struggles with you. Her hands were wonderful, wonderful in their hardness, in their strength. The hands of someone who's spent a whole life moving stones, touching them, accompanying them, who understands stones. Her fingernails were dark with dirt, dark brown, almost black, discolored, and it seemed to me they'd never really be clean, not with water and soap, that they carried the color like a badge. And that wasn't important, wasn't sad. The dirt was part of the work, part of the identity, part of the authenticity, part of the love for stones. She said that she builds dry stone walls in the Jura Mountains, everywhere in this region where farmers still have their borders, where land's still paved with stones, not with cement, not with modern mortar. That's an art that's almost gone, she said, an art that dies with people like me, the last generation perhaps. Young people don't want to learn anymore, don't have the patience to place a stone so precisely, millimeter perfect, so that it holds without mortar, firm, secure, so that it speaks with its neighbors, shares their weight, carries them, so that the wall can breathe. Yes, breathe, that's the right word, the word for the secret. So that water flows through when it rains, so that moisture doesn't back up, so that the wall lives, so that water flows through and the wall still stands, steadfast, 100 years, 200 years, generations, centuries, and no one has to repair it, no one has to clean behind it, renew it. That's the art. That's the miracle. She showed me her hands again, not with pride, not for show, not theatrically, but with a kind of dedication, a kind of love, a kind of humility. She said that a stone tells you everything if you learn to listen, if you're ready to bend, to learn the language stones speak, the old language. The roughness on one side, rough, splintered, that's meant for the next hole that will fit, the notch, the indent. The smoother edges on the other, smooth, polished by water, by time, meant for the air, for the wind, for water to flow. The weight. The weight is important. The weight tells you intuitively whether this stone wants to be below, heavy, holding, or above, light, free. The way it fits in the palm of a hand, exactly so, millimeter, no other position. There's only one truth. And then you must know where this stone wants to be, not where you want it, not where it suits you, where it's quicker, saves time. Haste is the enemy. But where the stone wants to be, where it sits right, for the next 100 years, for the generations to come. She told me of a wall she built 40 years ago between two farms to clarify boundaries. One farmer didn't want to see his cows at the other farmer's place, wanted distance, wanted respect. But also, without knowing it, to create beauty. She didn't know she'd be creating beauty. That wasn't the intention, but it happened. It came about. She'd chosen the stones so carefully, so patiently, that they formed a pattern, not intentionally, not planned in advance, not from a design, but because she placed each stone where it wanted to be, millimeter by millimeter, where God wanted it. And the stones themselves decided what was beautiful, the composition, the harmony. And how the light plays on that wall. The stones are different reds, browns, grays, and yellowish, golden, and a movement emerges, a kind of melody in stone that doesn't end when you look at it. It never ends. You can stand before it for hours, and you always see something new, something different, because the light changes, because time changes, because the eyes change. And that farmer who wanted the boundary, he was hard, she said. A hard, embittered man who only thought about boundaries, only about separation, only about control. He called her when the wall was finished, his voice trembling, and wept. He wept on the phone. He said it wasn't the boundary he'd wanted, that it was wrong. It wasn't just a boundary, he said. It was art. It was beauty. It was love, unexpected love hidden in stones. And he couldn't live with that love that was in stone, that looked at him every day. And she asked, matter-of-factly, without accusation, whether he wanted her to take it down, tear it apart, whether she should take the stones apart again. But he said no, not literally no, but I don't want it taken down. I just don't want to have to pass it every day. I don't want to see it. The wall remained there, steadfast, and he moved away, away from his farm, away from the beauty, away from himself. And now, 40 years later, the whole village comes, the whole region comes to see the wall at sunset, when the light is gold, and photographs it and says admiringly, "That's beautiful. That's made by God. That's a miracle, not by humans." But it was a woman, a single woman, with hands, with patience, with love, who could speak with stones.
She said that the problem of modern times is that we want to do everything fast, that we can't wait, can't listen. Fast, fast, fast. Cement, machines, force instead of patience. Money instead of wisdom. Profit instead of love. But a stone doesn't want to go fast. A stone knows only slow, only time, only patience, only becoming. A stone knows only permanence. It doesn't grow old faster, only older, only more itself, only deeper its nature. And if you lay a stone hastily, if you throw it instead of placing it carefully, then the wall will know that, will feel that, will live with that, and eventually it will start to speak, to crack, to break, from the haste, from the misunderstanding between builder and material, from the violence. A wall is honest. It doesn't lie. It doesn't hide. It shows, reveals how you built it, whether with love or with haste, whether with respect or with brutality. A wall is a mirror of the builder's heart. She gazed out at the flying mountains, dark, distant mountains, and her gaze grew very wide, distant, dreamy, as though she could see all the walls she'd built in her life, countless, lost in the valleys of the Jura, in the forests, in the villages, some already 200 years old, made beautiful by wind and time, their colors changed by weather, their original roughness smoothed, softened, made human by decades of sun, of rain. And she said that the age of the walls means life, that age isn't a sign of decay, but evidence. That means you worked right, that you didn't lie. The stones would betray that, the truth would come out. That you respected the stone, didn't use it, didn't exploit it, but respected it like a person. That you negotiated with it, conducted a dialogue. And the stone will carry you, will hold the wall, long after your death, long after you're forgotten. Your wall will stand, generations will pass by it, and they won't know your name, won't know you existed. But your love will keep them warm on cold days. Your care will hold them, upright, steadfast, true. The train stopped at Delimont, the city of the Jura, and she stood up, slowly, with genuine strength. Not young, but reliable. And I watched her still have that heavy walk, as though gravity were pulling her downward toward stone, because she'd been stone for so long, had become stone from her work, changed, metamorphosed by decades in which she held stone, understood stone, spoke with stones. And she left the train with a small bag, without hurry, without drama, and I imagined her making her way to a wall somewhere that's waiting. There's always a wall that waits, always a task, and starting again to lay, stone by stone, patience by patience, without hurry, without impatience, without force, respectfully, with humility, as though building a church or telling a love story or living a life. And I sit here, and my body grows heavier, like stone, like sediment, like a wall slowly growing older, older and more beautiful, older and wiser. And the stones around me, even those the train is built from, the steel, that's also stone, a liquid stone, a stone that carries people, carries burdens, carries dreams. They hold me, patiently, without hurry, without impatience. Warm from the heating, but also warm from something older, something deeper, from love that lives in craft, in stones, in patience. And I let myself sink, stone by stone. The bed becomes the wall, and I build my sleep
stone by stone, patiently, rightly, without haste, without hurry, and I fall into the wall, into sleep, deep, warm, secure. The light in this dining car brought me a moment back tonight, clear and sharp, as though it were happening right now, not colored by memory, on the Budapest to Vienna line, an old line, a line with history. It was winter, 1922, 100 years ago almost. The windows were frosted, ice on ice, and I was young and inexperienced in love, naive, hopeful. And I saw a couple sitting at a table under a lamp that made the light so warm, so golden, that it looked like gold, as though the lamp itself were made of honey, of beeswax, of light itself. It was Orient Express elegance, crystal glasses, heavy, expensive, white tablecloths, starched, spotless, cutlery heavy with silver, with history, with decades in this one train, this legend. It was an old couple, but not old in the sense that time had worn them, used them up, damaged them. No, time had polished them, refined them, like a tool used for 100 years. They were old the way a great house is old, not crumbling, not cracked, not decayed, but solid, known, safe, familiar, with stable foundations you can count on. Their hands lay on the table, close together, but not touching, not holding, not from fear, but just present, just there, as though nearness itself were enough, as though the air between them connected them in invisible ways. And between them lay a menu, heavy, cardboard, with gold lettering, that they both looked at. Their eyes followed the words, or so it seemed, though it was visible, obvious, that neither of them read a word, that the words didn't matter. They weren't looking at the menu. They were looking through the menu at each other, through paper, straight into the other's eyes. The waiter came, in all his elegance. In his white gloves, he waited, patiently, professionally. The man opened his mouth to speak. I saw his chin move, the words forming. But the woman laid her hand on his, very lightly, just 2 fingers on the back of his hand, not pressing, but gentle, and said with a firm, sure voice, "The same as always." Not questioning, not uncertain, not hesitant, not feeling, saying, knowing. And the man smiled, as though he'd expected this, exactly this, as though this were part of a ballet, a tango, a choreography they'd performed 1,000 times, 1,000 nights perhaps, 100 years together. The waiter nodded formlessly and disappeared into the kitchen, and it was as though nothing extraordinary had happened, for the waiter, for the other guests, for the world, which never looks. But I knew I'd just witnessed something extraordinary. A form of love so subtle you could barely see it, so quiet you needed silence to understand it. I couldn't resist. I had to ask. And I asked her, the woman, how long they'd been married, how long this love story lasted. She answered without looking at me, still gazing at the man, her eyes not leaving him, not for a moment, even as she spoke to me, even as she answered. "Since we were children. That was 40 years ago. 40 years. The word 40 had weight in my ears, heavy as a stone, like a medal, like a state of grace. 40 years sitting with one person. 40 years of having the same menu, the same script, the same words, the same courses. 40 years of wanting the same thing every day, needing the same thing, eating the same thing. Become routine, become meditation. And yet every day different, because the years changed, because age changed. 40 years because the food doesn't matter, is not important. The person beside you is important, only them." The man looked at me then, for the first time in our conversation, and his eyes were very gentle, full of kindness, full of pity for my youth, my naivete. And he said, slowly, carefully, as though giving counsel, "The secret isn't that we always love each other, not literally always. There are days, weeks sometimes, when love sleeps, when feelings grow cold, when you're simply faithful, not warm. The secret is that we've learned not to disappoint each other. Not big disappointments. Love survives mistakes, survives big mistakes even, survives infidelity. But the small disappointments, the daily ones, the creeping ones that you forget, that you promise and don't keep, that you listen but don't hear, not really. We've learned not to do that, to avoid it. And that sounds weaker at first, but it's much stronger, much more important. A big disappointment you can forgive given time, but not disappointing each other, never disappointing again. That's fidelity. That's love.
The food came, carried by waiters in white gloves, on white plates, with sauce, with garnish, with art. This food looked expensive, looked important, looked precious. But it seemed not to interest them, not really interest them. They ate very slowly, methodically, not hurried, very attentively, as if the food were a meditation object. And they didn't speak. The whole time they didn't, not a word, not once. But their feet, I could see their feet under the table, hidden under the white tablecloth, their shoes almost hidden by shadow. Their feet touched gently, constantly, not by chance, but like routine, like dialogue without words, a language only bodies understand. The left leg touches the right, then back, then again and again. A music, a rhythm, a communication only their bodies understood. Only they understood. And I saw that that's the highest form of love, not speaking, not grand gestures, not complaining or defending, but silence, the gentle silence, the quiet silence, the silence unafraid of silence, of the other's nearness. The dining car steward brought the bill, small, elegant, on a silver tray, discreetly presented, and as he set it between them on the table, between their plates, the woman still said nothing, was silent, still. The man nodded, paid, no words, no discussion, no negotiation. He'd learned that words were less than action, that action was love. And I asked myself as I watched whether happiness comes from agreement, from harmony, or from silence, from the ability to be quiet. Perhaps the same. Perhaps silence is the highest sign of agreement. Later, as we all left that dining car, the train was approaching Vienna in the night. I could already see the lights, the first suburbs, the city's poverty and wealth. We were almost at our destination at this night. I watched them put on each other's coats, very carefully, very tenderly, as though dressing a child for the cold night, or wrapping a precious picture to protect it. The man lifted the woman's coat, guided her arms through the sleeves carefully, not quickly, and whispered something. I didn't hear what. His words were only for her. And her face smiled, a soft smile, the smile of someone being heard. Then it was reversed, the man's coat, her hands, her tenderness, and their hands perhaps met by chance while buttoning up, while fastening. Or perhaps nothing was chance between them, nothing. Perhaps it was all planned for 40 years. And I understood that marriage isn't something you live, not literally experience like an event, but something you build every day, very patiently, very quietly, without grand gestures, without drama, without echo, only in silence, where real things happen, where love breathes. And I'm back on today's train, 100 years later, almost exactly. And the light isn't golden as then, not like honey, but it's warm, it's there. And I still see those two people looking at each other, silently, quietly, completely, wholly. And I think that love is perhaps not what I thought then, not what youth believes. Love isn't the rapid heartbeat, not the fluttering, not the desperation I felt when young, that violent, chaotic emotion. Love is quiet breathing next to someone. To-dum, to-dum. The rhythm of time, year after year, decade after decade. The lungs synchronized, the heartbeat in accord,
without thought, without effort. And when you grow old, you simply sit next to the person and are quiet. And the silence is filled with 40 years, filled with 1,000 dining car meals, filled with touches. And that's everything. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's heaven. I met the television repairman on the Leverkusen to Opladen line on a winter evening when the windows were fogged, wet, soiled, and the lights of the industrial cities flew past like yellow dots, like stars in darkness. And he was a man, an old man, who'd spent his whole life repairing televisions, not building them, but repairing, maintaining, healing. There aren't many of his kind left anymore. Almost all have retired or died, long dead, or given up, lost hope. But this man, he still repaired them with passion, with a toolbox full of tools, old pliers, old wires, old parts, the suitcase so worn and scratched, dented, that it was old enough to be history, to tell stories of decades, of houses, of people. He told me he started with tube televisions in the 50s after the war, with big boxes, heavy as furniture, dark, menacing, that could explode, dangerous if you weren't careful, if you didn't have respect, if you touched the wrong wires. Adventure every time, small dramas, risk, but also wonder when the light came. And now, he sighed deeply. I saw his body bend a little, saw how time showed itself. Now the televisions are so thin, so flat, so perfect that you can't repair them. Not really, not physically, not with hands. You can only replace them, throw out the old ones, toss them away into the trash, buy new ones, always new. The electronics aren't made for human touch, not for hands, not for fingers, not for tools. They're made to disappear. After 2 years, after 3, then they're obsolete, unimportant, rubbish.
But he still has work, he said. His voice grew softer, more tender, as though speaking of children. Old people, older people like him, who aren't willing to abandon their televisions, not from frugality, not from stinginess, but from love, from genuine feeling, who say, "This television, it was my friend, my companion, my window. I saw the Apollo landing on this screen, 1969, the first time humans set foot on the moon, and I sat there alone and stared at that gray screen, and it was as though I'd touched the moon itself, as though I'd been part of history." My daughter was born, and I turned off the television, not important, not any more important, and drove to the hospital. This television has known my whole life, all my decades. It has seen me age, the wrinkles come, the hair turn gray. It can't just go away, not just be thrown out. I'd feel lost, alone without this television, in my room, with its light, with its news, with its voices. I asked him if this work makes him sad, if it makes him desperate, that modern electronics can't be repaired anymore, that everything's simply thrown away, disposed of like rubbish. He thought for a long time, a very long time. His eyes became very clear, glowing, thoughtful, and he said, "No, it's not sad. It's different. It's change." The work was always the same, bringing light to someone, literally light, into the darkness of their room, into their loneliness. Whether that comes from tube electronics, those big glassy tubes, those vacuums, or from a chip, small, infinitesimally small, invisible. It doesn't matter, really doesn't matter, it's not important. It's about the television lighting up again, the light coming back, and the person sits before it, redeemed, and knows they're not alone, that the world still exists outside their room, that there are people, that there is life. And I saw that this was something deep, a secret. The television is not just a machine, not just electronics and plastic and emptiness. It's a window to other worlds, yes, to stories, to dramas,
to people who speak, who laugh, who cry, who live, but also a window that holds loneliness, that carries it, that supports it, that lovingly embraces it. When you're old and you live alone, and so many old people live alone, abandoned, forgotten, then the television is the only one who speaks to you, who just speaks without asking for a reply, who doesn't expect you to respond, to be engaged, who isn't offended when you're silent, who's just there, mute and faithful, year after year, like an old dog, like an old friend, who waits patiently.
He showed me a photo on his old phone. The display was scratched, cracks everywhere, but the photo was clear, very clear. An old lady, she looked 90 years old, 90 or more, sat in an armchair, a gray armchair, worn, before a large old television, black and white set from the 70s, robust, heavy, stable. And her hand touched the screen gently, not aggressively, not wildly, but lovingly, tenderly, as though touching a child. He said he'd repaired this lady, and I looked confused, and he laughed quietly, a playful laugh. "No," he said, laughing, "not the lady, the television. The television. That's my joke," he said. But when he left, after an hour's work, a difficult hour, the television was fixed, the picture was back, the brightness came back. She said to him, with tears in her eyes, "You saved me. My window was dark, black, empty, and now it's light again. You saved me, thank you. Thank you that I'm not alone. Thank you that I can see, that I hear, that I'm connected." The television repairman said that's the reason he keeps going, why he doesn't give up, why he keeps traveling with his tools. Not from nostalgia. He's not sentimental, this man, not soft, not romantic. But because it means he's still important, that his knowledge is still needed, that his hands still help, that there are still people like that old lady, who understand that a repair is an act of love, not just a craft activity, not just work. That you preserve something not because it's new, not because it's valuable, not because it's worth money, but because it's old and known and familiar, and because the person loves it, because it's part of their life, because it carries their story. The train pulled into Opladen slowly, braked, the wheels squealed, and he packed his old suitcase together very carefully, tool by tool. Each tool gets its place, finally closed tight, finished. And he smiled at me, not happy, not sad, not emotional, but like a man who knows his life and accepts it, who's at peace, who understood. And he said, his voice was calm, determined, "Somewhere a television is waiting for me that's dark, whose screen is black, dead, and the person sits before it and waits, hoping. And I'll go and bring light. That's my job. That's always been my job, since the first television. That will be my job until I can't walk anymore, until my hands are too weak." And he went out onto the cold platform. Opladen was cold, dark, gray, an industrial city in the night. And I watched him go down the steps, slowly, patiently, his suitcase in one hand, but with purpose, with intention, knowing where he's going, knowing that someone is waiting. And the train carries on into the night, into the cold night, into the dark night. And somewhere an old lady sits, watching a bright screen, watching light, watching images. And she's not alone anymore. Not today. Not for a long time yet. And that matters very much. That's perhaps the most important thing of all. The only thing that counts. And I think that we all try, in our own way, to bring light into the dark world, each of us, with our tools, our hands, our work, our love. Ta-dum, ta-dum. The rhythm of the train grows slower. And that's enough.
It's sufficient. That's everything. It's enough. And my eyes grow heavy, and the screen before me is dark now. But that's not darkness, not fear. That's sleep. That's rest. Warm. Deep. Safe. Like a window closing. I met the silent woman on the Hamburg to Kiel line on a winter morning before the sun rose, when the world was still dark and everything was black and gray, everything dark and impossible. She sat at the window seat, exactly where I was going, at the window seat that could have been called mine, but she was already sitting there, was already there, as if she'd always been there. But she didn't look up at me, not questioning, not annoyed, not unfriendly. She simply didn't look at me, so I simply sat down across from her, without asking, without words. She was small, very still, barely more than a shadow in the dark night, with gray hair bound in a thick braid, old, careful, a braid that had held for many years, and the hair smelled of something I couldn't name, not oil, not soap, not flour, but of time, of years, of life. She wore a green coat, very old. The color had already faded, had turned gray-green. It was a coat that had made many journeys, knew many stations, had met many people. And gloves, black ones, that had also done long service, worn, tattered at the edges, but still warm, you could see, still functional, still ready to give warmth. I sat down across from her, my suitcase up in the rack, my old jacket beside me, wrinkled, warm. And she said not a word. Not hello, not good morning, not please sit. Not unkindly, not... She wasn't cruel, not heartless, but also not inviting, not with a smile, not with a look that says welcome. She just kept gazing out at the dark landscape, which slowly grew grayer, became light gray, became dark gray light, while the sun prepared to come, prepared to rise, slowly climbed up behind the fields. And we sat together, hour after hour, and we didn't speak. Not a word fell, not a single syllable. And it wasn't embarrassing, not awkward, not unpleasant. No music, no radio, no sound from others, just the train and the wheels, to-dum, to-dum, to-dum. The rhythm, the beat, the heart of the train that carried us, that held us. It's a rare thing that two strangers, two completely unknown people, sit together for hours and say nothing. And it's not unpleasant, not awkward, not embarrassing, not awkward. You'd think it had to be unpleasant. We're social beings. Human nature demands speech, communication, exchange, small talk, any words at all. But it wasn't. It was as though we'd made a silent agreement, without words, without anyone saying anything, without me needing to say it or her needing to say it. It was just there, this agreement. We're here, both alone, both on this journey, both on the way to somewhere, to some destination. And that's enough. That's perfect. That's more than enough. We don't need to fill what's already full, what's already fulfilled, with silence, with respect. The air is not empty when two people sit together without speaking, without communicating with words. The air is full of understanding, of genuine comprehension, full of what could be said, but doesn't need to be. What remains unsaid is more beautiful, stays more beautiful. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I looked at my watch. It was exactly 7 o'clock, 7:15 seconds. The woman opened a small bag, a patchwork bag. The leather was cracked, was old, was worn by time and travel. From her bag, she pulled out a roll. The roll looked warm, still warm almost, fresh almost, as though she'd just baked it or had just bought it. And a very old knife. It was antique, it was precious. The handle was silver, was worn, was faded, was a knife with history. She cut the roll very carefully into half pieces, not arbitrarily, not randomly, but with intention, with purpose, with attention. In the middle, evenly, perfectly. so that each half was equal. And she ate, without hurrying, slowly, methodically, and chewed each piece completely through, completely, entirely, as though chewing were important, as though eating were a meditation, a prayer. And when she was finished, she offered me the other half, not asking, but giving, naturally, simply, the way you feed a child, the way you fulfill an old tradition. I took it without asking. We ate together, quietly, silently, still. And the sun began to rise, slowly, hesitantly, wondrously. And the light came red first, then orange, then yellow, soft colors, colors of hope. And the landscape became colorful, became colored, became alive.
Time passed, and I didn't notice how much time passed, how fast or how slow it passed. The morning became bright, grew brighter, grew more golden, became yellow and almost warm, like a blessing. We passed villages, small stations, other trains, life, other people on other journeys, other stories. But we seemed separated from all that, was in our bubble, our world, our silence. But we weren't moving, or it seemed we weren't, as though time stood still in this compartment, in this moment, in this present. And the silence between us didn't become unpleasant, didn't become oppressive, became ever more beautiful, grew ever richer, until I began to understand, to truly understand, why some people can live together for years without a word, without words being necessary, and are completely happy, completely fulfilled, completely satisfied in this silence, in this present. When the train arrived in Kiel, slowly, very slowly, braked, rolled into the station, the grass before the station, the platform approached. She stood up, slowly, not hurried, not hasty, arranged her coat, pulled it straight, checked that she hadn't forgotten anything, the old knife, the breadcloth, her money, her thoughts, her memories, and said to me, the first and only word she spoke in all those hours, in all these long hours of silence, in this whole journey from Hamburg to Kiel, these hours that were a life. It was the first voice I heard from her, and it was old and rough. It was a voice that had lived a lot, that had experienced a lot, but also gentle, incredibly gentle, like linen that's been washed long, that's old, that's soft. Thank you. One word, a single word, not thank you because you were nice, or thank you for the half of the roll, although that could have meant that too, although that could also have been part of the thanks. But thank you. Thank you because I'd been there, simply there, without overflowing, without speaking, without expecting, without needing, without changing her. Because I hadn't forced her to speak, not once, not with my eyes, not with my silence, not with my expectations. Because I'd understood that silence is also language, perhaps the only true language, the only real communication two people can conduct with each other, that two souls can conduct with each other. She left the train, and I watched her go down onto the dark platform, slowly, carefully, with dignity, the braids still bound, still neat, still gray and old and beautiful. The coat still green, still old, still lasting. The knife probably still in her bag, safe, closed, ready for the next roll, the next journey, the next meeting, the next silence. And I understood that some people don't need to travel, don't need to go from place to place, don't need to travel physically. Some people are already always on the way, even when they sit at a window seat and gaze out at the landscape, at the world, at the passing time. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. And that's okay. That's right. That's natural. It's even beautiful, even wonderful. It's the most beautiful thing there is. Because silence isn't empty, isn't meaningless, isn't lacking. Silence is full,
is fulfilled, is rich. Silence is a form of closeness, of intimacy, of genuine meeting. The only form that really matters, that really remains, that really lives.